You know, when somebody says, I love you, man, tomorrow, I mean, does it get any better than that? Anyway. Ooh, it is time for your Wednesday Patreon-only Q&A. And do we have a doozy this week? We do have a tech question to get into, and we have something that I know a lot of people really love when I start talking about, and that's a question of history. In fact, this question of history gets into some, shall we say, alternative science that has been briefly mentioned on the first episode of User Podcast, actually. But anyway, we'll get into all that in a minute. Little shop talk to open it up. Usually the Wednesday Q&A is kind of a good place for that, because I don't know that, like, I could put the shop talk just in a, just release the text post of a type on Patreon to bring that up. But I don't know that the text posts always get checked out. So I want to talk about it here. One thing to bring up quickly, I've learned that due to some recent events and it's not just about me. I know some others who have had dramatic drops in Patreon usage, and there's a lot of people that just want to stop using Patreon. I did have someone send me in some very interesting alternatives to what Patreon offers. I'm going to be looking into those. I don't think any platform's ever going to be really perfect. Anyway, this is all stuff I have to, I've got to figure out, but I'm aware that there have been some serious issues. I'm not going to talk about them right here. But I've been aware that, even like people that I know who are widely loved and wildly popular were like inside of 24 hours, they lost like 100 patrons. And it was in a reaction to something I think the Patreon did. But anyway, so I know I've noticed a little bit of a drop on my end as well. And I've learned really to not take it personally. And I fully respect people who say, hey, look, I can't support Patreon anymore and I'm moving on. Yep, I get it. You're not that they don't want to support me, just that they can't support Patreon any further. And I think it behooves me to start looking at alternatives, just because this is becoming a thing, even though as much as Patreon has really helped out a lot of content providers and activists and people doing, amazing things around the world. So anyway, that's something that I'll be keeping an eye on, just to let people know. But if due to some recent events, you no longer wish to be a Patreon user, I totally understand, let me just say that I get it. Okay. What's going on for you, and you got to stick to your principles. So anyway, yeah, so that's out of the way there. Something that you might have seen release earlier today or the night before, as of this episode getting released on Wednesday, I released an audio edition of Sovryn Insights. Which Sovryn Insights is something that's part of the $5 tier, and the audio edition will also be part of the $5 tier and up. And what it is, it's just like they're like essays that I write up, or blog posts, more or less, that talk about historical matters. The one that I released just now, or that probably came out just a little bit before this episode does, is about snake goddesses and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. So anyway, it's short. When you read a blog post of that type, it usually comes out to about 12 to 15 minutes when it's all said and done. And just to let you know, that's something that I'm offering. Not every Sovryn Insights post, just real quick, not every Sovryn Insights post is going to be able to translate to audio. Some of them are going to have a lot of links and a lot of perhaps things like diagrams or pictures that are just so vitally important. You can't really do it in audio format. Maybe there's a way I could think about how to make it do that, but that's never been something I think that works very well. Like Audible, when you get a book or one of the great courses from the teaching company, right? Which I love those, from Audible, when you get them on Audible, they say, well, in your Audible library, you can find the PDF that is, that works with this book or with this course. And that's always been, in my opinion, a pain in the ass to try and download and find and really navigate with the audiobook. So when it's something that requires a lot of that, I don't know how I feel about that. But Anyway, so not every Sovryn Insight is going to get an audio edition, but the ones that can, I'll put out audio editions here and there. And it's just a nice little bonus for the $5 and up patrons. It's nothing too seriously. I don't think it's going to entice necessarily anyone to become a $5 patron. Maybe it will, but it's there, and it's just they're quick shots for me to do and to put out there, and for you to have just a little more content to make sure you're really getting value here. So if you're wondering what that was, that's what that was. And we do have the Sovryn Insights. I do at least one a month. The December one should be coming out in fairly short order. We will be discussing the Ankh. That's exactly what it's going to be about, the Egyptian Ankh, which might have relevance to one of the questions that we're getting into this week, but I'm not going to discuss it within that framework. Just let you know that there might be relevance to that, because I think there's a lot of relevance to the Ankh itself. Historically, of course, most people know the symbol. It looks like a cross, but it has a loop at the top, right? Anyway, if you want to find out about that, well, you're going to have to read the Sovryn Insights on that matter. So, okay, the other thing, one last bit of shop talk, then I want to talk about actually a very interesting thing very interesting app that or service, I guess I should say, that I tested out. I'm going to tell you about that, then we'll get into a couple questions, and then, of course, we have our album of the week, which, I'm going to, all right, let me get the album of the week out of the way, or not, I don't want to do the album of the week that's actually our album of the week, but with the album of the week that I hoped to be talking about this week is not coming out, and this is a shame. Was it Within Temptation? The band Within Temptation, which I've been a fan of for over a decade now. As soon as they came out with their song, What Have You Done Now with Keith Caputo, I just thought that was so badass. And of course, their album, The Unforgiven, maybe one of the best rock albums of all time. I mean, it's that good. It's really that good. And a concept album at that, which is amazing. In fact, I'd love to get the comic books around that, because they did like 3 or 4 issues of a comic book story around this story that exists within the concept album of The Unforgiven, which is like this kind of vampire story, which, since Within Temptation is sort of a gothic power metal band, it works. They can do that. And that was really cool. But their new album, Resist, that's the name of it, was supposed to come out December 14th, I think, was the official date that it was supposed to come out, and it just didn't end up happening. And what a shame. Seriously, what a shame, because there are such cool songs. The 3 songs that they have released so far are just really rock solid. Firelight, and then there was kind of the bigger one, which is The Reckoning, which was the first song I had really heard from it that I thought was so cool. It's not coming out till February 1st, 2019 now. It's supposed to be coming out December 14th, but that's not happening. And I'm really disappointed by this. I mean, we do have 3 songs from it, and the 3 songs are rock solid, no pun intended. But, it's definitely a little different from what they usually do. It's still, its metal roots are there. But they say the claim is that it's getting some new mastering done. I could almost believe that. In fact, some of these songs are good, or like 3 of the songs are very good, if not great. But I think, especially like The Reckoning, I can imagine changing a couple things. Like there's this weird little and it sounds a little weak and a little too electronic. And I think if they gave that a little more epic flavor, that the song would turn into not just great, but anthemic, which is about the best thing I think a metal song can do, in my opinion. Not always. I mean, great metal songs could tell a story too, like Blood Red Skies by Judas Priest, right? But it could become anthemic and like that big of a deal, take them right over the top. So if they're looking to remix some of that up and bring in some new flavor, I think that could take a lot of these songs to the next level. Also, every version I've heard of these songs, and I'll explain more of how I heard them, official releases of them, not just on YouTube, do seem to have some mastering problems. So this might be a very real thing, but it's a shame. I hope to catch Within Temptation on the road, actually, in concert. That would be great, because they are playing a North American tour around this album. But the album will now just come out just before their first dates, which is kind of weird. Well, I mean, Hailstorm did the same thing with Vicious, but regardless, So anyway, I wanted to talk about Resist. I was really looking forward to this album. In fact, it was the last big album of 2018 that I was looking forward to, and it's not coming out till February 1st. So, but we'll talk about an album when we get to Album of the Week later. Now, one last bit of shop talk. Then, like I said, we will get into the questions. Well, here, let me read this email. Just a great email from a patron. Hey, Brian, I have an idea for the weekly Patreon feed version of the Prime episode version. How about a rapid fire news section? The concept is a couple of science/tech news stories not talked about on the show, and you would be interested in sharing. The idea in mind is a headline, link to the story, then a short opinion/response from the stallion. Just a thought. It may or may not entice non-patrons, knowing there's additional material each week. P.S. The 1 hour shows are amazing. Thank you. So okay. This is Dan Savage, who does the Savage Lovecast, whatever. I've listened to that off and on at points. It's not like in my podcast feed, but others may be listening to it, and I'll check it out. He does what's called like a Magnum edition of his show, where he has like a bonus interview and some other things that if you pay into, I don't think he's doing Patreon, but he has some kind of setup where you can get an exclusive edition of the show. And it's a longer edition of what's normally the free version of his show, but it's just a longer edition that you get if you're a subscriber, if you're a paid subscriber to it. And I toyed with that idea with the 1 hour show. What I want to put to you is I think that this is a fine idea. And the specifics of what should be added in are not what I thought about. I only thought about the abstract of there being a little something extra for patrons with Prime episodes tacked on to Prime episodes. If I want to hear from you, the executive producers of Sovryn Tech, which I consider all patrons to be. Do you want me to tack on? This would maybe take up all of 10 minutes. Maybe not even that of little extra content. I wouldn't want to add on, because like if I added on a half hour, right, that would defeat part of the purpose of doing the 1 hour Sovryn Tech Primes now, where it frees up more of my time. If I add in 30 minutes, it's not going to fly. But something short, a little 10-minute, where a couple little things that I find interesting, kind of like a foreplay segment. In fact, when the person emailed this to me and I was thinking about it, I'm like, that could be a fun thing to advertise and say, you get the climax every week on the free version of Sovryn Tech Prime, but the Patreon version, you get the foreplay, and you always want some foreplay, baby. Like I was thinking of, kind of advertising it like that. Like that came to mind for me. This isn't a bad idea. It's certainly something I'm open to. Again, as long as it doesn't like break that 10 to 15 minute mark, because I would, and as long as it's kept very simple, it would not be something, that would be too over the top. But I'm open to this, and I'm open to hearing people's thoughts, because as we are reformulating and looking to make 2019 a really huge fucking year for Sovryn Tech, I'm open to these ideas and to implementing them, because I really think even if Sovryn Tech did get picked up by SiriusXM in 2019, which is a very real and serious goal for me, real as in it's not implausible, in 2019, I would probably still do Patreon only. Well, I guarantee you I'd do Patreon only content, but this would be something maybe that I would keep going on. I don't know what the contracts would look like with fucking contracts. God damn it. Well, they're going to happen with Sirius, but I don't know what the contracts would look like with SiriusXM as far as what I could do with what would be the Prime show that I would end up doing on there. Or maybe I'd end up doing a completely different kind of show that they would want to rebrand and they wouldn't want to call it Sovryn Tech. I don't know. And so this could still be a part of the program. But anyway, give me your thoughts. If you want to share your thoughts, comment underneath on the Patreon sound, or on the post for this on Patreon, or you can message me and email me. But it's a fine idea. I don't think it's not a bad idea at all. In the abstract, it's something I considered. But if one of you is interested in that, then maybe more of you are. And if you are, if there's a bit of a groundswell, then hey, we'll give it a shot. Anything to entice more people. Like I said earlier, I know that people are skittish about Patreon right now, and certainly there are there is a certain amount of equating between the price of crypto and perhaps like the amount of donations or patrons that I get. I think that's true for just about anybody that's been in the blockchain space for a while and perhaps was, drew people in from Bitcoin and blockchain, over the past 10 years or so. I definitely fall in that camp pretty hard. So, yeah, I mean, if it can bring people in, hey, great. And also looking into other donation models, sure, I'll look into that. That doesn't mean I'd stop Patreon, but it does mean that I would look into other donation, additional ways of getting this content to people. I think that may be a problem for some time, that some people have dropped off because for whatever varying reason, perhaps Patreon, and I've talked about this before, maybe Patreon isn't supporting their activists anymore or isn't allowing their activists to have a platform or whatever anymore and so on. And so they want to stick to their guns and quote unquote. But anyway, so there you have that. That shop talk took a little too long but there was a lot of things I wanted to discuss, and some of it I'm saving from what I was originally going to talk about at the end of the episode anyway. So there you have it. Let me know your thoughts on that, if you would, as far as, would you want like just a little extra 10 minutes for your Prime episodes for Patreon only? If you do, if there's enough of you, I will definitely consider it, because I'll do, like Bob Hope, I'll do anything for the fans, Anyway, let's look at our I was fucking A, let me close that out. Okay, so fortunately, the app responding to my voice reminded me of something I wanted to talk about before we get into our couple of questions. This is not Chop Talk. This is Tech Talk. Okay. I was buying on, of all things, on Kindle, the latest English translation release of one of my favorite stories or franchises, really, of all time, and that being Legend of the Galactic Heroes from Japan. It's originally in Japanese, of course, by Yoshiki Tanaka, who I guess he started maybe in the early 80s, like 82 or something like that. These novels first started. Well, for the past few years, they've finally been getting really serious English translations. Unfortunately, I think after the third book, they finally released book 8 or volume 8, they want to call it, which is Desolation. After like volume 3, they stopped releasing audiobook versions of them, which is really sad, even though I mean, the audiobooks were a little dry. The books themselves are some of the greatest space opera ever done. Certainly it's not older than Star Wars and arguably could be inspired by it. But Legend of the Galactic Heroes, it's such grand scale stuff. It is so much fun. And there's so much in it that, boy, you could only get from a Japanese author, in my opinion, because of the culture, that they're in. And it's brilliant work. And I've been obviously collecting all the English translations for some time. I am more familiar with the anime historically. I love the anime. The novels, certainly, I can see why they inspired anime and manga and so much else. And the novels are king. I mean, they're far superior even to what gets put in the anime. Even though the anime, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, I could say that it might be inspired by Star Wars, but in Japan, it's bigger than Star Wars. It just is. It's Japan's Star Wars, if you want to say that. Just like Valerian, one could argue, is France's Star Wars. Actually, that's not true, because Valerian is older than Star Wars, and George Lucas clearly copied a shit ton from Valerian. Really, in France's Star Wars is the original, not the Ronald Moore bullshit, the original Battlestar Galactica from 78. That's France's Star Wars. They love that shit there, and good for them. So, because I am with you. Okay. I am with my people. The French aren't my people, but if I had to choose another one, outside of being Jewish. Anyway, so I purchased this pretty much on release day. I wait for these things, and I got an email when I got it, after I downloaded it to my Kindle Oasis and everything. I got an email that said, hey, because of your recent book purchase, we're offering you 90 days free of Amazon Music Unlimited. Okay, now, I dallianced with Amazon Prime with their subscription model of not like the yearly fee, but the monthly fee version of Amazon Prime a little while ago. And with that, they offer you access to Amazon Music, which is effectively, now, I didn't say Amazon Music Unlimited. I said Amazon Music. Okay. So Amazon Music is effectively like Pandora. I mean, it's pretty much the same exact deal, where it's offering you various streaming stations and so on, and you can't like really go through all the songs or anything like that, or choose specific songs like in the more basic or the plus version of Pandora. Now, Pandora has a premium edition that allows you to do much of what I'm just about to describe for Amazon Music Unlimited. Again, there's the difference: Amazon Music and Amazon Music Unlimited. And I mess with Amazon Music, and if Amazon Music Unlimited was what came with a Prime subscription would be a very interesting thing, because I'm going to tell you more about Amazon Music Unlimited here in a second. So I think normally Amazon Music Unlimited is $7.99 a month. Again, I'm getting it 90 days free, so I figure, what the hell? I'm a tech journalist. Let's check it out. Okay, let's see what they're offering. And I imagine, the reality is it might not just be because, I don't know why. Me buying a copy of what I think is fairly unpopular in the rest of the world outside of Japan, which is Legend of the Galactic Heroes. That should not entice Amazon to give me like a music subscription of any kind, but it did. So fine, I'm rocking it, testing it out. Now, okay, as far as I'm going to give you a little bit of a review on this. This is a subject that we've covered. Music is something very important to me, and I know it's important to you, the patrons, as well as Sovereign Tech listeners in general. Granted, that's something that's kind of subjective, right? Like, there's people who like music, but really they just like their kind of music, right? They don't really like music in the abstract sense that they love music. And to some degree, those people kind of annoy me, but I get it. Okay. As to where, I'm one of those people that I just love art in the abstract sense. Okay. And I can appreciate a lot of different presentation and background and aspects of art. And when it comes to music, I'm not going to say I love all music. There's certainly, there's certain country songs that I can enjoy, but in general, yeah, I really do love all different kinds of music from all different eras, all different genres. I genuinely love music and can appreciate it for what it is. And, no matter what kind of style it happens to be, I can appreciate it for what it is and so on. So, music's a big deal to me. And I think a lot of my albums of the week are metal albums, but that's because I don't think right now metal is one of those things that either A, doesn't really have seemingly as strong an underground movement as some other more niche types of music do, or certain types of metal anyway. Of course, metal is a very broad term. So I bring it up on here, and there's just a lot of bands that I think still deserve a lot of credit that don't get credit. And so that's part of why I have a heavy concentration on that. Not to say there isn't tons of other great music out there, but I do try to shake it up every once in a while. Like, we'll do some synth wave, or we'll do a soundtrack or things like this. But I do like to highlight, it's pretty rare, other than, say, like Hailstorm coming out with something, or Dragon Force. It's pretty rare that, and even Dragon Force isn't a big band. Hailstorm is, I think, but it's pretty rare that I'll cover, like a major, like well, I don't know. Anyway, I'm usually not going to cover a really popular album. I like to uncover, the gems, the jewels that no one else seems to know are out there. So anyway, music is a big deal to me. So I take this very seriously. I'm not some passive listener. And if you have a music service, you got to do a lot to please me. And admittedly, as much as I have concerns around Amazon Music Unlimited, which offers approximately 50 million songs, which that might be the king now. Originally, it was Groove Music Pass had the largest music library for many years. Amazon might be taking the cake on that now. They offer 50 million songs, and you can listen to them, however many times you want. It's not just streaming stations like Pandora. Even though I love Pandora. That's outside of listening to music off of my own NAS. My primary way that I listen to music is on Pandora. Amazon Music, has a lot to offer as far as what songs you can find, what albums you can find, and so on. Now, I will say out of the gate, there's one crucial feature that Amazon Music Unlimited seems to be missing. They kind of resolve it, and then they kind of don't at the same time, but I'll save that for a little bit later. But let's talk about this. Amazon Music Unlimited is very feature-rich. It's almost perfect in what it offers to you. The amount of songs is fantastic, not to say that everything's there. And that's why none of these streaming services will ever really be good enough for me, because just by the nature of intellectual property, I don't think there's any music service out there that could have everything. Okay, that could have all of the music that I listen to. Granted, as I just described, I do listen to a lot of deep cuts, a lot of things that are very rare. I could list off some of the things that even popular things that Amazon Music Unlimited was missing, and were like strangely missing, including like there's points where even of more modern albums, they are missing, say, well, there's that popular song, Heart of a Warrior, right? I forget the guy's name, D Jizzy, whatever, something. They have the clean version of it. They don't have the explicit version of it where, the swearing's in it. And it's just odd. Like in fact, the entire album, they have the clean version of it. They have like 4 or 5 songs from the explicit version of it, but then there's like 10 songs within that are just completely missing. And so there's like weird omissions like that. But by and large, a lot of what I've wanted to listen to, even some of the rarer stuff, was there. In fact, including an album that I was actually about to purchase. Another situation where the CD was cheaper than the MP3 version of the album, which was Jan Hammer's Drive from 1994, which I think is just a really slick album by Jan Hammer. Of course, most famous for doing the music for Miami Vice, but Jan Hammer really has done so much and just a tremendous musician, and still makes music to this day. But anyway, I was looking for that, and then Amazon Music Unlimited had it. I mean, and that's a fairly rare album, and not something that most people are going to think about. And I get it that probably nobody else besides me even thinks about Jan Hammer on the regular, and I do think about Jan Hammer on the regular. But regardless, there's a lot of nice features, especially with more popular songs or albums. You can have it where the lyrics will actually like appear as they're said. Now, on my DS Audio app, which connects to my disc station, my Synology disc station NAS, where I keep my personal music collection, which honestly is a few million songs in itself. But I mean, not 50, but it's quite a few. That can do the lyrics as well if it's for a popular song that knows, but it really just like shows the lyrics. It doesn't like give you a presentation, as to where Amazon Music Unlimited makes it a full-on presentation. Now, this Amazon Music Unlimited does have a killer app, as it were, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But it has that. It has what's really another nice little feature to it. Now, I've bought music off of Amazon, as I've discussed before, because sometimes it's the only place I can get it, or it's the least expensive. And what it'll do is that in the app itself, or the player, because you can also listen to it through your web browser. I think you can even install a desktop app for it as well, which that's kind of a nice feature to have a featured, full featured desktop client, not just, it's still streaming from the web, but at least it's not like in your browser specifically. I actually think that's handy. You can, like, music that you've bought on Amazon as MP3s or however that shapes up will appear in your app for Amazon Music Unlimited, and it will separate them as a separate section where you can find the music that you've purchased. But the nice thing is that just like Google Play Music All Access can do, you can add music that's available for streaming into your library. Like you could add whole albums. Like I could put, and I did, I can put Jan Hammer's Drive into my music so I can find it quicker. Okay. And just kind of like go through my favorites in that. Now, the nice thing is that when you go to check out your playlists and so on, it separates what you've put into what it calls My Music Cloud. And then there's My Music Purchased, which is a very nice little separation. I know Google Play Music All Access kind of does that too, but this has it a little more front and center center, which I thought was nice. It's a very dark app, which is also nice. I can't for the life of me. Most of Amazon's apps are all dark themed, and they've been dark themed long before anyone else was dark theming shit. Audible is, the Kindle app is, and Amazon Music Unlimited is, even their photo app is. But for some fucking reason, the one app I'd want them to actually have a dark theme on, because of perhaps the time spent in it, is the actual Amazon shopping app or the website itself. Fuck, could you dark theme that already? Like, I get conspiratorial about this shit. Like, it's, I don't get it. Like, that's the one that we want, to actually have a dark theme. But anyway, it's nice that this has a very dark theme going for it, especially if you're using this while driving. There's a whole bunch of other features, very easy to navigate as far as, like, if you're listening to a song, you can say go to album or go to artist, all stuff that's in other streaming services, sure. But the UI on Amazon Music Unlimited is actually pretty nice. Not that complex. And there's just, it looks good. You got a great UX, right? The UI offers a great UX, which those don't always equate. But now, speaking of going on a drive, here is where the killer app for Amazon Music Unlimited comes in, and that I think is kind of insidious, as great as it is. And I mean, it is great. I don't like it, but it's great. I can admit that. Amazon Music Unlimited has Alexa built into it. And what this means is that when you have the app open, and you have to have the app open for it to work, and you have to give it permission, of course, which good on Amazon for that, for requiring a permission and not having this on automatically. Granted, that's part of Android's security set. But you can just say, Alexa, you don't even have to say, hey, Alexa. You can just say, Alexa, play whatever. Okay, in fact, and it can be really deep shit too, and it does a great job of it. Like, I say, Alexa, play Knight Rider 2000, the theme song from Knight Rider 2000, which is by Jan Hammer. And it'll find it, and it'll start playing it just like that, and it does a phenomenal job. I mean, like, even really complex stuff that I've tried to say, it gets it, and it just starts playing it. Now, I mean, that feature, actually, Cortana originally could do that with Groove Music. Not just even Groove Music All Access, but with Groove Music in general. Okay? And you like the Groove Music app on desktop. I don't think it ever had that ability necessarily on mobile. Maybe it did with the Cortana app. I don't recall. It's been a while since I've used that, and the feature set has changed over time. But of course, they got rid of that feature Groove Music's pretty much, or Groove Music, Music Pass is dead, and Groove Music is still an app that's there, but it's only on desktop, and they don't have it for any of the other platforms anymore, right? I think actually December 2018 was the cutoff for the ability to use the app on mobile still, so that's pretty much dead. But Groove Music could do that, and I liked it, and I talked about it back when it could do that, but it could never do that on mobile. And here's where Alexa becomes really interesting on mobile, and that's because when you're driving, you don't have to, thumb through your playlist or through, your artist collection or your collection. Like if I'm using the DS audio streaming app, I don't have to flip through myself to find anything. I can just say, Alexa, play this. Alexa, play this. Alexa, play this. Or I could tell it to play a PlayStation. Or you can even, a playlist, not a PlayStation. Or you can do this. You can say, Alexa, play a song like We Own It. And it does a phenomenal job of finding a song that's like it, and it'll just play that, and then it'll just keep playing songs in that vein. I mean, that is a real fucking game changer as far as that goes. Especially, again, the voice feature of Alexa is what puts Amazon Music Unlimited over the top. And I dare say it might be the best streaming service out there because of that alone, because it works so fucking well. It's crazy how well it works. I'm not going to leave that feature on, nor am I going to, I cannot imagine that I'm going to keep paying that. I mean, right now I'm getting it for free. I can't imagine I'm going to pay for this service because I already have all the songs that I want anyway. But hot damn, gotta admit, nice fucking feature, Amazon. Nice feature. I mean, I kind of get why people are nuts about Alexa. I I mean, this is a more controlled situation where you have to have the app open for it to work, quote unquote. And I guess I like that part of it as compared to it being something plugged in, and just sitting in my house that's always listening. It's a little more palatable, but still, I don't like how this is very much a Trojan horse to getting used to interacting with Alexa and doing so in, honestly, an incredibly useful way. I mean, it really is a useful way. When you're driving alone, for you to just be able to say that and have it switch it up, or even when I'm working out, it's handy because, I'll wear my Project Rock headphones, which those have a microphone built into them. And I can just say into the headphones, Alexa, play this, and it'll switch up the song, and I never have to reach for my smartphone. I mean, that's pretty fucking slick. Okay. I get the usefulness of that. But the usefulness of Alexa in that sense does not mean that Alexa, in the ability for it to bring Tide to your house or whatever other bullshit you need, is somehow viable, right? This is a use case where it makes sense, or at least it makes sense for me. And I think it's something that could universally make sense for people to have that kind of ability, because it's something that works so well, say, in a car or in certain settings where you're actually doing things in life. The bulk of how Alexa gets sold to you is that it's just there for when you're really not doing shit, and somehow it's supposed to make doing nothing meaningful, right? That's the real problem there. So, but I will, I'll give the devil his due, as they say. And, Amazon's got a winner here. I mean, it's a real winner. And I think at best, maybe Google Assistant can do the same thing now if you have Google Play Music All Access, but Google's music options are so convoluted, like with YouTube Music and Google Play Music All Access and all this blah, blah, blah. I can't recommend that. Now, one area where Google Play Music, I think, or Google Play Music All Access does a better job than Amazon is Amazon they used to allow for this, where you could pay like $20 or $25 or $20 a year, I think it was, and you could upload 250,000 songs to Amazon, and then you could play it through the Amazon Music Player. I'm not exactly sure if they still offer that feature, but I didn't see anywhere for that to be a thing in the Amazon Music Unlimited app. And Google Play Music All Access, where it stands tall, is that it offers you 50,000 free songs, of your own to upload to the service to listen to in addition to whatever Google Play Music All Access offers. Or you can just use Google Play Music for free with streaming stations and then your own uploaded library. And I know there's some, if you have certain phones or something like that, it actually lets you upload 100,000 songs to Google Play Music All Access, right? Amazon Music Unlimited, as far as I can tell, does not necessarily allow for that. Now, because you can buy music from Amazon and it will automatically put it into your library, it kind of does that, but not exactly. If it had that, where you could upload your own music and it didn't do Music Match like Apple Music does, or like, now, Apple Music probably has Siri built into it, right? So maybe it can kind of do the same thing. So Apple Music might be comparable to this. But just Alexa, it's creepy how well Alexa works with it. And as far as my understanding of interacting with Siri, it doesn't always work the best, and it doesn't always really understand you very well. But anyway, this ability to upload your own songs, if Amazon Music Unlimited had that, it would probably be the perfect music app. But again, you don't want it to have Music Match to where if they already have your song, they'll keep you from having to store it on their servers or something. That never works. That was the first reason why years ago I stopped using Google Play Music, because it was replacing my songs with the wrong songs. Same thing happened with Apple Music, is that it was replacing a person's and deleting entire albums. It was like a really ugly situation, and I don't think it's gotten any better, as far as that goes. So if Amazon Music Unlimited allowed for that, which Microsoft Groove did allow for that. Right. Microsoft Groove did allow for where you could upload just the raw files and it would just play the raw files. And that's how it should be done. If Amazon Music Unlimited had that, it'd be, like I said, it'd be king. And $7.99 a month, honestly, it'd be worth every penny, at that stage. And Alexa, is a great fucking addition to that. Like it's creepy how good that is, and just how useful it is. Like I said, I feel like it's almost insidious because it's getting you used to Alexa. But you want to be careful if you have the app open and you say something remotely like it can flub that a little bit. So anyway, I've tested it out, and I'll admit I'm impressed. By and large, I'm very impressed with it. So I figured it's something that I'd share with you here. Now let's get into, we've been talking about that for a while, but I didn't know if it would be something really worthwhile for Sovryn Tech Prime, because I think people want kind of different things with that. So I didn't put it there, but it's something that I was testing out, and you're more the diehards, so I figured you'd want to know about it. Okay, let's get into our couple questions here. One of them is kind of shorter, or I won't spend a ton of time on, and the other's pretty interesting. So, all right, let's see, follow-up NAS question. NAS, of course, network area storage, right? Your own little server. I have a small team and need to do collab work. How well does the Office software and file sharing, i.e. cloud sharing, work for that? Can you do comments and versioning? Okay, so yeah, a couple weeks ago, I think I did a little conversation about a NAS and how I use it and so on. The Office software, document and spreadsheets and all that works beautifully. It works, and it does have that. It has versioning. It has comments, and everything that you could want to do with that. As far as there's nothing missing from it. And maybe I've seen a docx file here and there that got translated kind of funny because you're not using Microsoft Office, right? But let's be clear here, Google Docs can fuck up a docx too. So it's not, I don't really see it as points against, Synology's Office software. But it works very well. The mobile app for it works very, very well. There's even the Notes app where you can just take notes. All of that does just beautifully. And there is versioning, like I said, and there are comments as well for all the users that you make, which also sync nicely with the chat app there. So yeah, if you have a small team, you're talking 7 to 20 people, or 5 to 20 people, I still think this is the best way to go. This is way more reliable than Google. Way more reliable. Hell, if you wanted, you could go as far as to set it up as your own mail server for your team. You already have it as a messaging option with chat, right? Now, as far as file sharing, oh boy. Okay, so it can do file sharing, like a Synology NAS specifically. Now, I know FreeNAS and others can kind of do this too. It just takes a little more work. But a Synology NAS, you can share links just like you would, say, with Google Doc, where you can share stuff to people who may not even have an account for your NAS. You can share links to content, video content, docs, audio files, pictures, whatever, folders. You can share that to people, and you can set the permissions and everything just like you would with like Google Drive or whatever. And it works great. It works really great. And they could even like play the file off of the NAS and everything. It's slick. You just share the link like you would with OneDrive or Google Drive. It works the same exact way. However, I have noticed that in Firefox, those links don't always seem to work. And I don't know if that's an issue with Firefox not meeting the standards of Quick Connect, which is the system that Synology uses for remote work. Like if you wanted to remotely connect to your NAS, you're not at home, you're on another network, you're at Starbucks or something like that, you would go to quickconnect.to, or you'd put in, the first part of the URL there, then quickconnect.to. I've noticed Firefox doesn't work very well with that. And in fact, it's getting a little ugly out there. There are some other things where I have been recently that I've been trying to use and test out that I've been very displeased that both Firefox and even Opera, which Opera is usually my go-to. That way I'm not using Google Chrome to do something. It just wouldn't fly. It wants Google Chrome. Or maybe Chromium, might have worked or something. But, even building that is... Well, anyway, and this has led to this is a whole side conversation to really have on the matter. But for example, like I've been very intrigued by, because they've been, the feature set that they've been releasing has gotten a lot nicer. And that is Trezor's password manager that they have. Now that operates off of a Chrome extension. First off, the Trezor wallet itself, which uses Electron, right? effectively, because it used to be a Chrome app, but Trezor, literally the Trezor wallet will only work with Chrome and Firefox. It will not work with Opera. There's no reason, in my opinion, that it shouldn't work with Opera. It very much should. I mean, because Opera's using, a lot of the same Chrome framework, right? And it's using, pretty much the guys at Trezor must have effectively said, just no. If it detects Opera, no. Even though Opera is using 95% of the same code, and same rendering engine and everything that that Google Chrome uses. Okay, it uses the Blink engine and so on. But also, I've wanted to use the Trezor password manager, and that it wants Chrome. For Trezor to work, and that's been I've been annoyed by that Opera is such a pain, and just kind of this force feeding of Google Chrome in a very real way, or even Chromium, and because Chromium is just as I guess you could say untrustworthy as Google Chrome is. Now, Google Chrome is secure. It is a very secure browser. When, as far as browsers go, it's not private, but it's very secure. And again, those are, I think you want both, but granted, they are kind of separate concepts. So, again, I've said this over the years and I've kind of gone back and forth on it, but I do get it where some people use Google Chrome because they fucking have to, they have a feature set or something or features that they want. And maybe they're really a big deal on YouTube. I totally understand why people who are really serious about YouTube, why they use Google Chrome. And we know, we talked about it on a Sovereign Tech Prime episode where Mozilla, did a whole write-up about the matter, saying that, this is ridiculous. Google is favoring its own browser and, putting in features that only exist within its browser, that exists within that 5% of code that's not open source. And yeah, it's true, So I get it. If in your workflow you got to use Google Chrome, okay. And that's the thing with the file sharing on Synology NAS, it did not work with Firefox. Or at least at the time. Firefox is constantly getting better. They did just switch to a whole new rendering engine about over a year ago. So that's something to keep in mind as far as that file sharing goes. But it does work very well when it works with the right browser. Also, there's Resilio, which used to be, it's Resilio, which used to be, it's a rebranding of BitTorrent Sync. It used to be BitTorrent Sync and still run by BitTorrent. But Resilio is what allows you to sync desktops and files and everything with kind of do placeholders like OneDrive can with your NAS. And that's a beautiful feature. That's a gorgeous feature. You got to pay for Resilio, but it's a one-time license fee and then you're done. And it's a little harder because it's not in Synology's own app store. You have to install it manually, but Resilio gives you all the instructions on how to do that, and I don't think it's difficult at all. Really, the pairing with QR codes is what makes it kind of difficult, but all of that is how software should work anyway. Pairing with QR codes, doing that kind of secure handshake, I think that's great. So yeah, just a really, really nice feature as far as that goes. And Resilio works on just about any platform. You can even get it for mobile. They're very, very nice. So yeah, file sharing, totally possible. In fact, I dare say it does it better than Google Drive does. It does it comparably, and then it offers you a little more by being so reliable, because it is an independent platform doing that, Resilio and your NAS. So, and it's kind of distributed in a way almost. So I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, I've been a fan of BitTorrent Sync for a while. Granted, BitTorrent Sync isn't exactly open source, but I do like what they're doing and kind of the distributed and very peer-to-peer nature of it. So that's something to look into as well. So anyway, yeah, that does work great for small teams. I think it's the fucking future. It's the way to do business. It's the way to do things. Especially if you have some kind of home base where you can set up the NAS and it's there consistently. Dynamite, really, really dynamite. In fact, to this day, if there was ever a lull in Sovereign Tech listeners, I would probably finally switch up the feed. Right now, the feed is effectively controlled by SoundCloud. I would change up. I would host Sovereign Tech on a completely separate on my own independent NAS. I would totally do that and let people download it from there and everything, I'd be all over that. Now, granted, also understand, to do everything that I just talked about, to do it really well, you do want to get like the highest amount of RAM possible. If you have to upgrade it yourself, do so in your NAS to really make that all viable. So just keep that in mind as well. But man, I would love to do that with Sovryn Tech. Maybe in the future, or if I ever do another podcast that's open, I might do something like that, or maybe that would solve some of the Patreon issues. Something to think about. So anyway, okay, we got a kind of a big question here it's not so much. It was something brought up on a live Hangout Q&A a while back that I want to address, and I said I would look into it, and so I've looked into it now, and I have things to say about it, and we're going to talk about none other than Atlantis. Bum, bum, bum. Not Stargate Atlantis. I mean the real Atlantis, or if Atlantis was real. Of course, that's kind of maybe the first big question that people want to answer for themselves. So I guess maybe before I say my own answer on the matter, even though I'm pretty sure I've said before, I was, again, on a live Hangout Q&A, actually my dear friend and Sovryn Tech co-host for the Star Wars update, which will be coming out later this month in December 2018. He said, hey, had you seen this documentary called Visiting Atlantis? And the idea that this is in the Rashat in Mauritania. Or Mauritania, is that how you pronounce it? Mauritania, which is a country of about 3 million people or so in Western Africa. Okay, kind of part of the Sahara here. And there is this formation there called the Rashat, which is, when you look at it from space and when you kind of know the overall gist of what Plato described of what Atlantis looked like. Of course, Plato would claim to have found out about it from Solon, right? Who claimed to have found out. Solon, of course, very big deal in Greece, particularly in Athens, and considered one of the kind of forefathers. He was a statesman, but considered one of the forefathers of Athenian democracy back in, say, like 6th century BCE and around there. Solon claimed to have learned about it from Egyptian records. Not that he went to Atlantis, but that he learned about it from Egyptian records. So, but then Solon passed it down Plato. Plato ends up telling everybody about it, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now what Plato describes as kind of this ringed continent, okay, or, well, doesn't necessarily say it's a continent, but this, very much this island city where in the middle you have this, you have the main large city, which is some odd, 30 miles across, kind of half the size of New York City or so. And then there's like a moat effectively around that, or water around that. Then there's a ring around that. Then there's one more ring around that. And so it has this ring that, looks like a bullseye. Okay. Now from space, the Rashat in Mauritania looks like, it very much looks like what Plato was describing, And so I did end up watching this documentary. It was interesting, to say the least. The way that it was being presented was interesting. And that's kind of their base. Now, this is a well-known structure, okay? It's called the Eye of Africa. That's what they call it, this structure and there's a few different theories of how the Rashat came to be. In fact, there is an alternative theory that got brought to my attention by another Sovryn Tech patron that I am going to address, and I will bring that up as well, which is kind of why, I pretty much had, I had Robin asking me, hey, have you ever heard about this? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. No, I wasn't aware of that. And then I had another patron who says, hey, well, what if it's this? And okay, so that warrants talking about, right? So anyway, the Rashat. Okay, so as far as what possibly, formed it, the idea is that maybe it was like a very weak volcano that didn't end up doing the full eruption, kind of a magma bubble style thing that creates this formation that sort of looks like a crater, but then it's sort of not, right? And craters generally, the theory goes is that it's either, a crater from impact, or it's some kind of volcanic activity that creates a crater. Now, there's another theory out there as far as what creates craters. I will get to that in a minute. Okay, and I assure you I will get to it. All right, but first let's talk about the real prospect of the Rashat actually being Atlantis. Okay, now again, a lot of it really does look in a very abstract way, what Plato described and what a lot of artists' renditions make Atlantis look like. Okay. This, admittedly, it runs into some problems pretty quickly. In fact, okay, let's get into that. Visiting Atlantis is definitely the people that made the documentary Visiting Atlantis are cherry picking a lot of info. Okay, or cherry picking to the point that they exclude other things, like there's the plains, nearby Atlantis and so on that would not match with what's in the Sahara. Okay, and with their model of, because their basic claim is that, okay, yeah, it was an island nation, and 13,000 years ago or so, that whole chunk of West Africa potentially was actually covered in water, and the Sahara is like a leftover basin of when Africa was not so much land, and there was a lot more water covering that area. And at that time, the Eye of Africa, or the Rashat, would actually have been, an island unto itself in a very real way. There's parts of what Plato describes that doesn't match up, even if that were true. Including the fact that, especially if we're talking 13,000 years ago, the mountains as described by Plato. So like they bring attention, the documentarians, can I call them that? Or the documentary makers, whatever, but I'll say the documentarians. I don't know necessarily that they're archaeologists or anything like that, or even geologists for that matter. But regardless, they're pointing out, well, there are these mountainous areas that, Plato talked about and everything. The thing is, this is where they start to cherry pick, because they neglect to mention that Plato says that these mountains were greater than Mount Olympus, taller than Mount Olympus. These were massive, massive mountains in the area of Atlantis. And the mountains near the Rashat are not that size. And there's no reason why they shouldn't be. If those are the same mountains, it's only been 13,000 years. We're not talking about like any real serious glacial shift that would have caused that. Otherwise, you would have seen a lot more evidence for that. There's interesting things. Like they're talking about, well, it said that there was elephants in Atlantis, and they do find that in the area of the Rashat, there is fossil evidence that there were elephants there once. And they bring up how, the Sahara in the past was a very lush area. It wasn't always a desert. And look, to talk about the Sahara, the makeup of the area of the Sahara was wildly different, even just, a few thousand years ago. And I think that there's a lot of very interesting things to discover under the sands of the Sahara to this day. I really think there are, regardless of how much satellite imagery and whatever, different types of cameras that we use and radar and you name it. I think there are things that if, we could move all that sand, we would find some remarkable human creations. Let's put it that way. Okay. Obviously, you'd expect to find incredible geological things or even biological things, but, or fossil evidence of some kind. But I think we would find remarkable human inventions, similar to, it's the land version of the Mediterranean, right? Like in the Mediterranean, we know the Mediterranean wasn't always as big. The Mediterranean Sea wasn't always as big as it is now. There are hundreds of cities, at least 200 cities underneath the Mediterranean. And those are cities to this day we still know very little about. There could be whole cultures under there. We have no fucking clue who they are, what they are, what they were. And I think a lot similar could be said for the Sahara. So, for Atlantis to be in what is now part of the Sahara, admittedly, it's not the craziest notion in the world if you think Atlantis was a real thing at all in the first place and not some metaphor for the invasion of the sea peoples as created by Plato or something, or maybe even created by Solon and then passed down to Plato and Plato didn't know better. It really depends how you want to follow the history there. Okay. But again, the initial premise you have to accept is that Atlantis was a real thing in the first place, or at the very least based off of a real thing in the first place. I personally, I'll get this out of the way and then we have more to say about all of this. Okay. I personally think that Atlantis was a very real place. I don't know that I'm going to necessarily buy into, Plato's description pretty much just says that it was past, the Straits of Gibraltar, right? Like it was past, what is it? The Pillars of Hercules, right? By Spain. coming out of the Mediterranean. I mean, that's effectively all that gets said about it. I mean, there's some discussion of geology around that, but other than that, you don't really get. It's a pretty broad placement, right? Anything could be past, the Pillars of Hercules, or just about anything. And honestly, you get people saying that Atlantis was, connected to Cuba, going that far away from those Pillars of Hercules. People can kind of slap this thing anywhere, and they do. Some people want to say that actually America was really Atlantis, even though it doesn't match the description at all of what Plato put down. Now, the idea of sunken land masses, even to the size of continents, that's not unscientific. That's not weird in itself. Really, I think where the problems arise with, shall we say, mainstream academics not accepting the concept of Atlantis, and Atlantis, by the way, will be a subject of a user podcast in the future, because I think it's actually a very important subject. In fact, it's one of the most written about subjects, if not the most written about subject in history, like literally, like more, I think even more than the Bible. Like, it's everywhere. it's crazy. The only character, if you consider Atlantis fictional, the only fictional thing comparable to it would actually be the character of Dracula. That's how popular Atlantis is in media. And this is just more or less since like the Ignatius Donnelly book from the 19th century about, the antediluvian world, right, which is about Atlantis. But I think the reason that mainstream academics stray from it, or scientists or whoever, really has to do with, especially like I just mentioned with Ignatius Donnelly, more of these claims that Atlantis was this wildly advanced civilization. And I don't just mean like advanced as far as like, maybe it existed during the Bronze, or would have existed during the Bronze Age. At least one would guess that based on what was the descriptions of Plato, again, which also were handed down supposedly from Solon. Like that, it was a Bronze Age world, and they were living in, the Iron Age, right? Like they had technology just a step above bronze or something like that. We're not talking about that kind of advancement. We're talking about where people start to claim, holy shit, they had nuclear power. Holy shit, they had, they had flying machines. They had all this other shit, like wildly advanced stuff that would be the subject of actually really great video games like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, one of my favorite games of all time, that opens right up with a person theorizing that, Atlantis was wildly advanced. Plato makes no real discussion of that, not in that way. His advancements, if anything, seem to be more cultural. This is a people that even, worshipped supposedly the god Poseidon, which has some interesting points for it with as far as, Atlantis being in the Rashad. We'll talk about that. And by the way, the documentary Visiting Atlantis, it is on YouTube. I put a link in the show notes for it if you want to check it out. You should always look into this stuff for yourself, But I think that's where mainstream academics like fall off on the concept of Atlantis. The idea that there's like a sunken continent, again, not crazy. That, Zealandia, there's a bunch of different ones that are kind of gone. But yeah, as soon as you start bringing up like that they were crazily advanced or something like that, they don't want to hear it. And Atlantis is not like taken seriously by most, academics and scientists and so on anyway. Even though, again, it may have been based on something completely legit. And I think maybe you could pin some people down to that, but they also would say that it's not something like what Plato described. So anyway, back to where these documentarians were talking about it being in the Rashad. Pretty much they're saying that it was there, and then either an earthquake or some kind of tsunami, or perhaps the Great Flood myth that seems to exist in almost every culture. And that's not wrong of them to say. They're right. I think a flood of some kind happened somewhere where a lot of humans were living, and because it is written about way too much. Also important to bring up, the idea of some like mythical land off a little bit in the sea is incredibly, incredibly popular in a bunch of different cultures, very disparate cultures, right? You have Lemuria, okay, which is Lemuria. Interesting thing. So Lemuria is this idea that India, there was a continent that connected India and Madagascar, okay? And in fact, the lemur, right? Like the ring-tailed lemur, the animal, the very real animal, gets its name, the lemur, because they thought that it evolved on Lemuria. I mean, that's how serious that was taken back in like the 19th century and so on. But, there's the claim that was a wildly advanced civilization, like India. People in India would claim that, and the West went nuts with the idea, whatever the West fucking means. And there are plenty of others in completely different parts of the world where they talk about and describe sometimes to great detail, which Atlantis is described to fair detail by Plato, these other lands. So, when you have when you have this common thread in a lot of different cultures, I think you do need to pay attention. Like, I really do. Granted, also, when a certain culture has what seems to be knowledge that they shouldn't possibly have, you need to pay attention to that too, even when it's only one little culture. But when you have a similar story or similar things described by a lot of different cultures, yeah, I think you should take notice. And that's where Atlantis initially stands as interesting to me and where my interest begins, because you have so many cultures that talk about so many different there were these other lands. Some people want to say, honestly, some people want to say that Atlantis was Antarctica. I don't think that's nuts. I've talked about a book many times called Out of Antarctica by Robert Argod. And actually, I think I've made that book available on the Patreon. If you go to rarebooks.sovereigntech.com, or maybe it's books.sovereigntech.com, one of those, it'll take you, and I think you can find because I got it. It's a very expensive book from years ago. Robert Argod's dead, I think, now too. And it's not like an ancient alien book at all. It's a very serious book done by a guy who, was on yachts a lot. and also had, academic credentials, who was saying more or less that humanity actually started in Antarctica. And you can find in like Polynesian myths and other places where they're talking about where they came from before they settled all these different islands, that it got covered in white, got covered in snow, which is what happened with Antarctica. So for Atlantis to be in Antarctica, I'm amenable to that notion, that's originally what we're talking about here. I am amenable to some other notions as well, but that's one that I think is interesting. So, but as far as with Rashad, maybe the most, so I don't, me personally, if we're, again, the documentarians really cherry pick their data. There's a lot of stuff that Plato talks about that I don't think exactly fits. But to be fair, I think a lot of the ways that people talk about, or what they say about Atlantis and where it could be, there's always cherry picking going on. Nothing perfectly fits, I think, or no theory really perfectly fits what what Plato was saying. One of the best, really, and maybe one of the most interesting theories is actually that the island of Santorini, okay, that when you had, what was that? Well, I don't think they exactly know, but it's like 2nd millennium BCE, okay, where you had the Minoan eruption of Thera, which wiped out huge parts of the Minoan civilization on Santorini. And this is a crazy volcano. In fact, it's a volcano that the Chinese wrote about. It was a volcano. Now, and that's important to bring up because we're going to get into alternative theories around what happens with craters and formations of crater-like, formations on Earth and elsewhere in a minute. Okay, I'm going to get into that, but it's important for me to say, no, this was a volcano that happened on Santorini. And again, just 6,000 years ago or so, 4,000 years ago or so. I don't think there's an exact date on when it happened, but it definitely fucked with the Minoan civilization as far as its impact on Minoa proper, as in the Isle of Crete. We're not exactly sure on that, but that's one of the more interesting placements for Atlantis, in my opinion, is actually the island of Santorini. But the problem there is that Santorini is completely in the wrong direction from where Plato said it was. Plato said it was past, the well past the Pillars of Hercules, right? Straits of Gibraltar there. So Santorini doesn't fit that bill because Santorini is interior, not exterior of that. So you're always cherry picking, no matter what we're talking about. So not necessarily going to hold that against them. But perhaps the best evidence, I think a lot of it was a little too much cherry picking though on their part. But perhaps some of the better evidence that they had going for them, or the more intriguing evidence, was they were looking at the Dogon people. okay, who do live in that area. Now, the Dogon, some of you who study like alternative history and so on, or alternative theories of history, might know a thing or two about the Dogon, because they are this very odd African culture that does seem to know about stars and star systems that they can't see, that nobody knew about up until, relatively recently in the past 100 years or so. But they've had this in their as part of their belief system and their religious framework for hundreds, if not thousands of years with the Dogon. And it's an odd thing. And people have brought up about it. In fact, usually what was effectively used to discredit this idea that somehow they saw Sirius A and Sirius B, which again, they shouldn't know about those stars. They can't see them. You can't see them. But somehow they knew exactly about them and, felt that there was some importance around it as far as with their gods and so on. And their gods are worth, or their god, and all that are worth talking about. And I'll get to that in a second. Part of what was used to discredit them was that they said that there was actually more there than what was there. So effectively, astronomers said, it's interesting that the Dogon knew about this, but then they're saying that there's like this other star there, but there's no other star there, so they must be wrong because they're mapping too much, and they're mapping things that aren't there. It's like, wow, they got lucky and they mapped a couple things that were, but then maybe it's all bullshit because they have more there than what's there. Problem is like now we kind of know there probably is a Sirius C, okay, which is exactly what the Dogon were predicting. We've known that since about 1995. So that adds on to the mystique around, the knowledge that the Dogon have, about the stars. And that's very strange. Now, the Dogon also, have a lot of reliefs and drawings and so on of characters in their mythology that are fish people. Now, why is that interesting? And it's interesting, like they kind of look like mermen of a type or something. Well, it's interesting because who is the god of Atlantis, according to Plato? Poseidon, right? And so that kind of adds to that because they're right there, and here they are talking about Poseidon, and they have this kind of advanced knowledge of the stars, which sort of fits in with what advancements Plato did discuss that the Atlanteans had in Atlantis. So that was maybe the most intriguing evidence as far as things go. Now, I mean, they had other stuff too. They're saying, well, like at the Eye of Africa, at the Rashat, we should be seeing, where are the buildings? If Atlantis was here, why aren't we seeing any evidence of, their whatever they constructed at Atlantis? And they bring up that, well, Plato's very particular as far as like what the stone was made, it's red, white, and black stone and so on. And there's red, white, and black stone all over the place that are being used by the people in Mauritania that that they use to build all their stuff. And so the idea is that they probably just scavenged all of these buildings, or the tsunamis just wiped it clean and made it all look like rock and rubble in the first place. But bottom line being is that Atlantis is literally everywhere in Mauritania. It's just taken a new shape into the buildings that the present day Islamic population that lives there is just using all of those materials, to build things. Now, that lends to another problem because Plato, this is more of that cherry picking, because Plato also said that there was like bronze everywhere. In fact, there's this huge shield wall around Atlantis that if there wasn't so much mention of precious metals, particularly bronze being with, a part of the construction of the shield wall, I mean, there should just be fucking bronze everywhere. Okay, that's the point. Like in all the buildings in Mauritania, there should just be bronze on fucking everything, right? And there's not. So that's a problem too. But to be fair, just about every theory around Atlantis, if you're treating it even as real, cherry picks here and there and eschews some depictions that Plato, lays out. So again, it's an interesting case being made. It's probably one of the better cases I've ever heard for where Atlantis could be. Like, it just about fits, especially if you consider that water may have been some odd 500 miles inland in West Africa at the time, back then when Atlantis would have been the thing. But I do feel the cherry picking is just a little too much, little too much. Granted, what Plato laid down, of course, he got from Solon. I mean, you're kind of so many people removed, and who knows what the Egyptian records were based on, right? that the idea that not everything was put down entirely accurately is a fair point to bring up and could work in the documentarians' favor or could work against them. In a couple minutes, I want to discuss where I think perhaps Atlantis is. And believe me, there's so much to say about this. If you think everything I'm talking about here is going to be what's in the User podcast episode about Atlantis, not by a long fucking shot. There's so much more to say about Atlantis, including discussions about just how wildly advanced they were, which I'd probably go further than some, maybe not as far as others. But regardless of that, I want to get to kind of a side question to this whole thing. Is Atlantis actually in Rashad? Had I heard about that? So that's what I've answered so far. Yes, now I have heard about it and I've looked into it. I find some of the evidence wanting, I'm not entirely convinced, but now let's talk about what formed Rashad itself. And here we go. So this is the question that I got about this. A Q&A caller last week introduced Brian to a documentary that proposes the Rashad structure in Africa was the true location of Atlantis. The point I'd like to address is around the latest thinking that the formation might have been created by a magma bubble. So this isn't exactly about Atlantis. Consider instead that it may have been formed by an electrical event. And okay, so I will share the links that this person shared also in the show notes for this episode. One of the links is for a video that's a documentary. Now, an electric event, what is that referencing? That's referencing a cosmological theory called the electrical universe or the electric universe. And in User Podcast, the first episode, I believe it was, I mentioned about plasma cosmology, which is also an alternative cosmology. Now, these are related, but they are distinct. The electric universe theory and plasma cosmology have similar roots, but there are differences. Particularly, the electric universe theory tries to attach itself to a lot of mythological events, which is what makes it of interest, perhaps, around the subject of Atlantis and so on. I, at some point, will probably do also a User podcast about plasma cosmology and the electric universe theory. I personally do not subscribe to it. I know the plasma cosmology is a little more conservative, shall we say, as far as how far it wants to go with things. The electric universe theory goes a bit farther and, gets into saying that, well, actually, gravity is, kind of like a magnet. What is it? It has poles, right? It has opposing poles. And the idea is that with craters, and the claimed evidence against it is that when you do simulations or experiments, effectively, to reproduce, reproductive experiments, to show, okay, what happens when, say, a meteor, asteroid, whatever, makes contact? What kind of crater does that create? Does that match with the craters that we're finding all over the place? And there's a lot of quoting of evidence that says, we can't explain why this crater's on Phobos, and whatever created this crater on Phobos, should have actually, something that could impact like that and create this formation on there should have actually destroyed the moon of Phobos, and so on. I actually have alternative theories for that kind of thing, especially when you talk about Phobos, because, and I talked about this years ago on Sovryn Tech on a Prime episode. There is evidence that Phobos isn't a real moon, that it's a construct. So, to say, well, a meteor or a contact event, a catastrophic event, hitting Phobos, should have destroyed Phobos. Well, not if it's an artificial, and you could say, well, that's crazier than believing in the electric universe theory. Sure. Go ahead. But we're talking about Carl Sagan, and even recently, and this is what made me talk about on Sovryn Tech Prime a few years ago, the ESA, European Space Agency, was, certain members of that, granted that's a huge organization, were suggesting that Phobos is artificial, that it's, it's not. Carl Sagan would effectively say that just about any moon would seem to almost have to have been placed there for it to do what it does. Okay. That's a little bit out of context of Carl Sagan, but regardless, the ESA was saying, oh no, it appears, and then there's the whole event with the Phobos 1 and Phobos 2 Russian probes that happened. That's very odd, where I think it was Phobos 2 that appeared to get shot down by a missile. I'm not kidding. There's photos of this that were top secret Soviet documents, okay, that we didn't find out about until the 90s, and not many people talk about it. So, but at least that's like some real evidence, and not evidence that is questioning, particle physics and so on, and like the theory of relativity, and which the electric universe theory does, where it's saying that really electricity has a much bigger role in all of this. But I'm doing a terrible job of describing the electric universe theory. I do get it. Like, I understand what they're saying. And they're saying that craters get created by an electrical event, which if you take an electric charge and say, push it against some sand, then it does create the kind of crater-like formation, say like the Richard, or say like craters all over the place. And that really craters that you see are really just, byproducts of electrical events where, you have these neutrinos going all over the place like some kind of aether, right? Just everywhere. One of my major problems with the electric universe theory is the idea that stars themselves do not actually go through a process of nuclear fusion, like that they are just sort of like nodes of these electric currents going throughout the universe. And we with helioseismology, like there used to be, explaining kind of the neutrinos, bursting from the sun and all that years ago. And I mean, literally up to just maybe 20, 30 years ago, was a bit of a mystery. There was a genuine problem there. And I think maybe people felt that plasma cosmology, where plasma plays a far more important role than just gases and, other forms of matter, throughout the universe. Okay. Maybe it could kind of outcrop from that because it would try to resolve that explanation with the sun. But now, thanks to helioseismology and a lot of different craft and instrumentation that we've done, like now we really know how the sun works on the inside. Before it used to be guesswork and we just have to base it upon the surface of what we could. But with helioseismology, we've really learned a whole fucking lot about the sun just in the past 10 years even. And we know how that baby works. And, internal nuclear fusion is clearly the name of the game. Also, the idea like the sun is negatively charged, but then solar wind is positively charged, kind of creating like this giant capacitor. This was some of this I could have talked about more in, say, the sun episode of User Podcast. But it was important to talk about the sun and how it actually functions, because I think that we base a lot of our knowledge of really the universe on our own sun. It is such an important subject, and it's such an important thing to study. And really ever since like we launched the stereo probes, we've learned so much, and we've potentially disproved a lot of other ideas out there too, like the planet Vulcan, which that's going to be a subject for another time. Maybe I'll talk about that soon somewhere. This idea of not only the planet Vulcan that was recently discovered, right? So many light years away, but that within, like between the sun and Mercury, that there was another planetoid, and they called it Vulcan, in our solar system. And that was an idea that had purchased for decades in the late 19th century, early 20th century, until, more or less Einstein's theory said, no, we don't actually need to have a body, because it was all based on predictive math and science, and astronomy, predictive astronomy, that, okay, no, there must be something there to explain the orbit of Mercury and so on. Now, thanks to Einstein, no, that's not necessary at all. And you can, when you run into these, a lot of people are saying, well, there's a problem with Newtonian physics and so on. Yeah, sure. And Newtonian physics is not the same physics that, and gravity even, like the explanation, the Newtonian explanation of gravity is not the same explanation that Isaac Newton came up with, hundreds of years ago. These things continue to evolve. Will they evolve to where plasma cosmology or the electric universe theory is a thing? Probably not. in my opinion. Okay. Not to say I have the most educated opinion, but I am aware of these theories, and I do look into them. And anyway, so the idea is that really the Richard was created by like an electrical current, and not volcanic activity. This is like a way for me to talk about the electric universe theory, but I don't know that I'm necessarily talking about it in like a favorable way that you appreciate. Like I'm not bought into that. The evidence that I've seen is found wanting, particularly around the sun and stars themselves. But then it'd be totally unfair of me to say, well, the electric universe theory people are quacks, but I think Atlantis is real and it was advanced. Right? Like, it's kind of like, everybody's an atheist plus one, right? Like everybody's an atheist with their other gods except their God. And so, we all have our theories that others may find crazy or something like that. Some of us just have better evidence than others. And I'm not even saying necessarily that I have great evidence. So yeah, bringing it up that it's, I don't think that that's the case. In fact, I would argue, as far as like the crater argument around the electric universe theory, okay, where it's because of an electrical charge, more or less that causes these craters, particularly in Africa and like vitrification. I don't know if the electric universe theory like considers vitrification where, sand turns to glass. If they consider that part of their theory, I know they like to play with a lot of myths, and so do I. I know, I understand the appeal to that. But I would argue more so, maybe, and I know this is going to, if we're going to go all the way, it's almost more plausible to say that a lot of these craters are due to some kind of interstellar war, I think, than to say it's because, there's just like, there is plasma, but like that there's plasma everywhere and it's causing these electric currents that are just zapping like the parts of these planets and create, creating these electrical events that create these craters. So it's what I got. I'm discussing it. I'm bringing it up, and I know I'm not getting into too much detail on it, and that's because all of these are just major subjects to discuss. So, okay. So while we're laying out crazy theories, or not crazy, and I don't say crazy with disrespect. All right. I know what I'm about to say might sound crazy. So, I'm with you. Okay. We're all in the funny farm together. I think that Atlantis may be far more related to, say, the mythical island of Hy Brasil, which is supposed to be off of off the coast of Ireland, which, again, understand, Atlantis, all that's really said about Atlantis is more or less that it's past, the Pillars of Hercules. Like that's really all we've got as far as geography goes, okay? Or as far as geolocation, not geography. Geography, we know a lot more, but as far as geolocation goes. Now, Hy Brasil is, kind of the Irish version of Atlantis, or the Celtic version of Atlantis. And, up until, I think it was like in the 19th century where they found, what the hell was the name of that place? Like this kind of shore that they found where there's amazing like coral reefs and everything, or amazing reefs and so on. Porcupine Bank, I think, off of the coast of Ireland, which some people are saying is what Hy Brasil could have been based off of, but that's now sunk. A lot of that is sunken land. I think like the concept of Avalon, Hy Brasil, Atlantis, not Lemuria. We know where Lemuria was supposed to be. But, it's kind of same basic gist that there are these continents that do sink. And granted, Lemuria is more or less seemingly to be disproven. Lemuria was thought up. It's different because Lemuria was thought up that, okay, no, there has to be something that connected Madagascar and India. Like that's where Lemuria comes from. Now, satellite imagery and so on, we know there's nothing there that did that. It's not like Zealandia where we're finding this and that, that actually maybe connected, larger parts of Australia to everything else. Okay. So yeah, just to name a few, and it's just a few, but there's so many more in so many cultures. But Avalon, out of King Arthur, right? Hy Brasil, Atlantis, and some other ones that we could list off. I think they are referencing the same place, and I do think that they are referencing an area, a culture that spread out. And Ireland's weird in itself because it seems to have been colonized, shall we say, or inhabited in reverse. Like people seem to come from the wrong way to do it. And that could only be done by a sea people. If you want to get into maybe more where, say, what the Polynesians were talking about, or some of these other cultures talk about how they kind of came from the sea and, and they traveled a great distance from a land that got covered in white or something like that. It wouldn't take too much of a weather change to make the area of Ireland and Hy Brasil, to be a much more, much uglier affair as far as weather goes. Effectively, especially if it was a little more northern, for it to turn to a land of white. Hey, maybe. Okay. So yeah, that area actually more northerly, not so much Antarctica, perhaps, even though who knows, but this idea of sea people that spread out, and maybe these same people ended up at the Isle of Crete. And it's a theory that I think that they're, but I'm more intrigued by that, by it being somewhere up there in that direction than I am it being actually in Rashat or it being part of Antarctica. But I am coming from, when I talk about Atlantis, I am not basing it solely on, so I'm kind of making a cheat here, right? Because I'm not basing it solely on what Plato said Atlantis was. I'm saying Atlantis is the same myth from a lot of different cultures, or it's the same land, not myth, but the same land from a lot of different cultures. And, you'd have to put all of their stuff together to really find where that was. Okay. So that's kind of my theory on it. So I don't stick strictly to the concept of Atlantis and Egyptian records. I mean, if it's literally based on that, I mean, who knows how much, what could have been said within that. And here's the problem with that, as far as the issue with Egyptian records being modified by the Greeks, we know that the Greeks borrowed tons of their philosophy, tons of their, what could be considered their cultural advancements, all from Egypt. All from Africa, frankly. I mean, you have, there's a point where you have Greeks writing books about chariots when the Greeks didn't have chariots. So where the hell did they get the idea of chariots from? Well, it's obvious. They got it from the Egyptians, when they'd go to visit it, just like Solon did. Okay. Solon was a very real person. That's not up to debate. So anyway, this has been one of the longest Q&As in a while, so I want to wrap it up. Bottom line being, the Rashat theory is very interesting, and it does fit a lot of bills. I will admit that. But I think there's a little too much cherry picking, and in my own opinion, it's not broad enough in scope. Okay, where it's not taking into... What's interesting is that within the theory of the Rashat theory, there is they accept that, well, there's so many cultures that have this concept of a flood that must be, or that's probably real. But then, they don't take into concept like other mythical cities to explain, possibly the legend of Atlantis or the writings on Atlantis, that could have been also more. Okay. And could be somewhere completely different, even though, Plato would think that he's referencing this area. He could actually it could all be based on other mythological or what would most people would consider to be mythological cities. I mean, they do bring up, sort of the old canard, and it's not an unfair one that, well, people thought Troy was mythological, but then we ended up finding it, and that ended up being real, and they'll bring up other ones. And those are good examples to bring up that there was actually something there. And I think that that's a good argument to make. I don't think that that's necessarily a good argument to say that Atlantis was exactly what Plato said it was and exactly where they said it was. But as far as like fitting a lot of the information, I mean, it does it does an okay job. It's just that it cherry picks a little too much. And also there are some parts of it that we can't say for certain that, that the Atlantic Ocean was 500 miles inland on Africa at that time. There's evidence that yes, parts of the Sahara or large swaths of the Sahara were covered by water, but it's not enough, to say that with any kind of certainty. So interesting theory, but it's not one that I've bought into yet, but it's one of the better ones. I'll certainly give it that. So speaking of one of the better ones, okay, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to end on the Atlantis conversation for now ends on that. Okay. But the Atlantis conversation is not over, nor is I'll talk about the electric universe theory and plasma cosmology deeper in the future as well to give that its full due. To talk about one of the best this week, because I had to alter what the album of the week was, this is one that came out in April earlier this year of 2018, and it's a re-release. I didn't realize that it came out. Kind of an odd re-release, but it's by Richie Sambora. This is probably in conjunction with what he was doing with Orianthi, which was the RSO. They kind of did like a little band together called RSO, and they released a bunch of little EPs and singles. Of course, they broke up, but... that happens, folks. Even even with power couples, it occurs. But with our, anyway, I think this was to help promote RSO, but he re-released his first solo album from 1991, which was called Stranger in This Town. He re-released it, and he did an expanded edition. Really, the only bit of it, I mean, it sounds remastered, or at least it's amplified a bit, which is nice compared to the 91 version of it that I even have on CD. It only has one extra song, and it's a cover of a Jimi Hendrix song. But they're calling it an expanded edition. It's a 2018 release. Look, I think Stranger in This Town is one of the best albums ever made. It's more of a bluesy album than so much of a rock or metal album. And Sambora is just one of the most talented musicians. I mean, I think he's incredible. I think he's the best part of Bon Jovi, easily. And I know he hasn't been in Bon Jovi for a little bit. But regardless of that, Stranger in This Town, this is back in the 90s when they were on a 17-month hiatus. And I thought this album was just magic. Church of Desire, Rosie. Rosie's one of the most badass songs you'll ever hear. And it's sexy. I love Rosie. Great song. So if this entices you to go listen to a solid blues album, in fact, actually Rosie's not exactly the blues. Rosie's more of a straight rocker. Please do so. Richie Sambora, Stranger in This Town from 1991. He got an expanded edition release in 2018 with a nice little extra track. And, it's a good time. I mean, I love it. I think it's a damn sexy album. One of the sexiest albums out there, actually, as far as with the guitar. So do give that a listen. And anyway, that's it. All right, we got to end it. We've gone an hour and a half. Got to stop now. We talked about Atlantis, talked about Amazon Music, talked about everything. Woo! I don't know if the expanded edition of Richie Sambora's album is on Amazon Music, but it might be, or Amazon Music Unlimited. So, all right, that'll do it. If you have questions about Atlantis and all that, happy to talk about that further, or the Electric Universe theory. I could talk about that a little bit further. But anyway, there you have it. We all have our crazy shit, so me included. I mean, I really don't mean to say crazy in a derogatory way, because I think we all have our wild notions. So there you go. I will see a lot more to come out throughout December. I will see all of you on the other side.